Your soulmate spoke about you today. And what they said was beautiful. There is something happening right now that you cannot see. Not because it is hidden from you intentionally. Not because anyone is trying to keep a secret. But because some of the most important moments in life begin quietly, long before they ever become visible. And today, somewhere between an ordinary conversation and an unexpected emotional confession, your soulmate spoke about you. They spoke your name. They spoke about the impact you have had on their heart. And what they said was far more beautiful than anyone expected. What makes this moment so powerful is that it wasn't planned. No one asked them to say these things. No one pressured them to reveal what they felt. The words simply escaped. As though their heart had been carrying them for so long that it could no longer stay silent. And when that happened, something changed. Because the moment they started talking about you, they realized something they had been avoiding for a very long time. Stay with this. Because what happened next changed everything. The day began like any other. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing seemed destined to become important. Yet beneath the surface, something was shifting. Your soulmate had been carrying thoughts about you for days. Maybe weeks. Maybe even longer. Thoughts they rarely shared. Thoughts they kept tucked away behind smiles, distractions, responsibilities, and routines. But today was different. Today those thoughts refused to stay hidden. Throughout the day, your presence kept appearing in their mind. A memory. A feeling. A sentence you once said. A moment they thought they had forgotten. It all kept returning. Again. And again. And again. Almost as if the universe itself was placing your image directly in front of them. At first they tried to ignore it. They told themselves they were overthinking. They convinced themselves it was nothing. But the more they resisted, the stronger the feeling became. And that is when someone noticed. Someone close to them. Someone who had been watching their behavior without realizing what it meant. This person noticed the pauses. The distant expressions. The moments when your soulmate would suddenly smile without explanation. The way their energy shifted whenever certain subjects came up. And eventually, a simple question was asked. A question that seemed harmless. A question that sounded casual. Yet it unlocked everything. Who are you thinking about? The moment those words were spoken, something froze inside your soulmate. Because they knew exactly who they were thinking about. You. And for a brief second, they considered hiding the truth. They considered changing the subject. They considered pretending nothing was happening. But something inside them was tired of pretending. Something inside them wanted honesty. Even if only for a moment. Even if only in a small way. So they answered. Not completely. Not yet. But enough. Enough for the conversation to begin. Enough for the first layer of truth to emerge. And what followed was something they never expected. Because once your name entered the conversation, it refused to leave. That is when the entire situation changed. The person listening became curious. Not because of what your soulmate said, but because of how they said it. There was warmth in their voice. There was softness. There was emotion. And those things are difficult to hide. Especially from people who know us well. The listener immediately sensed there was something deeper happening. Something meaningful. Something real. So they asked another question. What makes this person so special? And suddenly your soulmate found themselves standing face to face with feelings they had been trying to organize for a very long time. Because how do you explain the effect someone has on your soul? How do you describe a connection that feels bigger than logic? How do you explain why one person keeps appearing in your thoughts no matter how much time passes? At first they struggled to answer. The words came slowly, carefully, almost cautiously. But then something unexpected happened. The truth began speaking for them. They talked about your kindness. Not the obvious kindness everyone sees. The deeper kind. The kindness that leaves lasting marks on people. The kindness that changes a room without demanding attention. The kindness that lingers long after conversations end. Then they talked about your strength. The strength you may not even realize you possess. The strength you carry through difficult seasons. The strength that continues moving forward even when life becomes heavy. And as they spoke, they became emotional. Because for the first time, they were hearing their own feelings out loud. Sometimes we don't fully understand our hearts until we hear ourselves speak. And that was exactly what was happening. Every sentence brought a new realization. Every confession revealed another hidden layer. But that wasn't the biggest revelation. The biggest revelation came when the listener smiled and said something your soulmate wasn't prepared to hear. They said, "You sound like someone who's in love." Silence. Complete silence. Because suddenly every feeling they had been organizing into separate categories collapsed into one undeniable truth. And in that moment, everything became impossible to ignore. Your soulmate laughed at first. Not because it was funny, but because the statement touched something vulnerable. Something real. Something powerful. They wanted to dismiss it. They wanted to explain it away. But their heart was no longer cooperating. The more they thought about those words, the more they realized how much truth was hidden inside them. And for the first time in a long time, they stopped running from what they felt. What happened after that completely shifted the energy. Because once they acknowledged their feelings internally, memories began flooding back. Moments they had overlooked. Moments they had underestimated. Moments that suddenly seemed far more significant than before. They remembered conversations. They remembered laughter. They remembered tiny details most people would never remember. The way you made them feel understood. The way your presence created peace. The way life seemed brighter after hearing from you. And as these memories returned, a question emerged that they could no longer avoid. What if this connection was meant to become something more? What if these feelings weren't temporary? What if every sign, every thought, every emotional pull had been leading toward the same realization all along? The question lingered. Growing stronger. Growing louder. And before the night was over, your soulmate would come face to face with an answer that would change their future forever. But no one expected what they admitted next. But no one expected what they admitted next. For a long time, your soulmate believed they were protecting themselves. Protecting their heart. Protecting their emotions. Protecting themselves from disappointment, uncertainty, and all the unanswered questions that come with caring deeply for someone. Yet as the conversation continued, something became impossible to deny. The feelings they carried for you were no longer small enough to hide. And perhaps the most surprising part was this. They had not been trying to forget you. They had been trying to understand you. There is a difference. Forgetting is what happens when someone leaves your mind. Understanding is what happens when someone refuses to leave it. The listener noticed this immediately. They noticed how every answer somehow led back to you. Every story. Every memory. Every emotional reflection. It was as though your presence existed in places your soulmate had never fully explored before. And then came another question. A simple one. But one that struck directly at the center of everything. When was the moment you realized they mattered this much? Your soulmate didn't answer right away. Because suddenly dozens of memories were competing for attention. There wasn't one defining moment. There wasn't one dramatic event. Instead, there had been hundreds of small moments. Tiny pieces of connection. Quiet experiences. Simple interactions. Moments that seemed ordinary at the time but now felt extraordinary when viewed together. And that realization affected them more deeply than expected. Because love often doesn't arrive like lightning. Sometimes it arrives like sunrise. Slowly. Quietly. Almost unnoticed. Until one day you realize everything is illuminated. That realization settled into their heart with unexpected force. And as it did, another truth surfaced. A truth they had never spoken aloud before. Stay with this. Because the next confession stunned everyone. Your soulmate admitted that they sometimes imagine conversations with you when you're not there. Not because they are lonely. Not because they are obsessed. But because your presence brings them clarity. There are moments when something happens in their day and their first thought is, I wonder what they would think about this. There are moments when they hear a song and immediately connect it to you. Moments when they see a beautiful view and wish they could share it with you. Moments when something makes them laugh and they instinctively imagine your reaction. And once they admitted this, there was no turning back. Because now the hidden truth was becoming visible. You had become woven into their emotional world in ways they never expected. Not intentionally. Not forcefully. Naturally. As though your energy had found a permanent place within their heart. The listener sat quietly for a moment. Then they asked something that made your soulmate look away. Do they know? The room seemed to become still. Because that question carried enormous weight. Do you know? Do you know how often they think about you? Do you know how many times your name has crossed their mind? Do you know how many feelings have remained unspoken? Do you know how much meaning they attach to the connection you share? Your soulmate's answer was hesitant. A little uncertain. Because the truth was they weren't sure. Maybe you've sensed something. Maybe you've felt shifts in the energy. Maybe you've noticed signs. Or maybe you've had no idea at all. And that uncertainty was beginning to trouble them. Because for the first time, they weren't just thinking about their feelings. They were wondering about yours. That is when everything became more serious. Until this point, the focus had been on what existed inside their heart. Now their attention shifted toward possibility. Toward the future. Toward the question they could no longer avoid. What if you feel something too? The moment that possibility entered their mind, it changed the entire emotional landscape. Because hope can be beautiful. But hope can also be terrifying. Especially when someone truly matters. That is when the entire situation became more vulnerable than ever before. Your soulmate began imagining outcomes. Some hopeful. Some uncertain. Some exciting. Some frightening. And among all those possibilities, one fear stood above the rest. A fear they had never fully acknowledged. The fear of losing a chance they never took. The fear of staying silent for too long. The fear of one day looking back and wondering what might have happened if they had simply been honest. That thought lingered, growing stronger with every passing moment. And the more they thought about it, the more they realized something important. Life rarely rewards endless hesitation. Some truths eventually demand expression. Some feelings eventually require action. And some connections become too meaningful to leave suspended between uncertainty and silence. The listener sensed this shift immediately. They could see it happening. They could hear it in your soulmate's voice. The conversation was no longer about emotions. It was becoming about decisions. Real decisions. Life-changing decisions. And then the listener asked the question that changed everything. The question your soulmate had secretly been asking themselves for a very long time. If you knew there was no chance of rejection, what would you tell them? The answer arrived instantly. Too instantly. As though it had been waiting behind the door all along. No hesitation. No confusion. No uncertainty. Only truth. And what your soulmate said next revealed the depth of their heart in a way that surprised even them. They said they would tell you how much peace your presence brings. They would tell you how different you are from everyone else. They would tell you that no matter how busy life becomes, thoughts of you somehow continue finding their way back. They would tell you that certain connections cannot be explained through logic alone. And they would tell you that meeting you changed something inside them. Something permanent. Something beautiful. The listener became emotional. Because they could hear the sincerity behind every word. There was no performance. No exaggeration. No attempt to impress. Only honesty. Raw honesty. And sometimes honesty is the most powerful thing a person can offer. But even that wasn't the deepest confession. Because as the conversation continued, another realization emerged from the shadows. A realization your soulmate had been approaching for months without fully recognizing it. What happened after that completely shifted their understanding of the future. Because for the first time, they stopped imagining life without you in it. And the vision they saw next changed everything. Send, next part, and the story will move into the phase where your soulmate begins imagining a future with you, experiences a powerful emotional breakthrough, and discovers a truth they can no longer keep hidden. And the vision they saw next changed everything. Until that moment, your soulmate had been living in the space between possibility and reality. A place where feelings exist but decisions remain unfinished. A place where hopes are quietly carried but never fully spoken. A place where the heart knows something important, yet the mind keeps asking for more time. But something shifted that day. Something deeper than emotion. Something stronger than attraction. For the first time, they allowed themselves to imagine what life would actually feel like if you were truly beside them. Not as a distant thought. Not as a beautiful possibility. But as part of their everyday reality. And what surprised them most was how natural it felt. They imagined ordinary moments. Simple moments. The kinds of moments most people overlook. Sharing stories at the end of a long day. Laughing over something neither of you could explain to anyone else. Experiencing small victories together. Facing challenges together. Building memories without even trying. And as these images appeared in their mind, an unexpected feeling rose within them. A feeling that had been quietly growing for far longer than they realized. Certainty. Not certainty about every detail. Not certainty about how every chapter would unfold. But certainty about one thing. You mattered. Far more than they had allowed themselves to admit. Stay with this. Because what happened next opened a door they had kept locked for a very long time. The listener noticed the change immediately. There was something different in your soulmate's eyes now. Something calmer. Something clearer. As though pieces of a puzzle had finally begun fitting together. And that's when the conversation moved somewhere neither of them expected. The listener asked, "What are you actually afraid of?" At first, your soulmate gave the obvious answers. Fear of uncertainty. Fear of timing. Fear of misunderstanding. Fear of complications. But the listener remained quiet. Almost as if they knew those weren't the real answers. And eventually your soulmate stopped speaking. Because suddenly they understood. The deepest fear wasn't rejection. The deepest fear wasn't distance. The deepest fear wasn't even failure. The deepest fear was discovering what life would feel like if they never tried. That realization hit harder than anything that had come before. Because regret has a way of haunting people differently than disappointment. Disappointment fades. Regret lingers. Regret asks questions years later. Regret revisits moments long after they have passed. And for the first time, your soulmate realized they did not want you to become a story that ended with unanswered questions. That is when the entire emotional landscape shifted again. Because now the conversation wasn't about feelings. It wasn't about hopes. It wasn't about dreams. It was about courage. The courage required to stop hiding behind uncertainty. The courage required to trust what their heart had been showing them all along. The courage required to believe that some connections enter our lives for a reason. And the more they sat with that realization, the more another truth emerged. A truth they had never shared with anyone. Not even themselves. The next confession stunned everyone. Your soulmate admitted that there have been nights when they couldn't stop thinking about you. Nights when the world became quiet and distractions disappeared. Moments when there was nothing left except honesty. And during those moments, thoughts of you became impossible to ignore. Not because they were forcing them. Not because they were trying to create fantasies. But because your presence had become connected to something their soul deeply desired. Peace. Understanding. Connection. Home. That last realization surprised them most of all. Because people often think home is a place. But sometimes home is a feeling. A person. An energy. A presence that allows the heart to rest. And somewhere along the way, without even realizing it, your soulmate had begun associating that feeling with you. The weight of that realization settled heavily on their heart. Yet strangely, it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt right. As though a truth had finally been acknowledged. As though something hidden had finally stepped into the light. But what happened after that completely changed the direction of everything. Because later that evening, after the conversation had ended and the listener had gone home, your soulmate found themselves alone with their thoughts. And that's when silence became powerful. There was no one to impress. No one to explain anything to. No one asking questions. Only their heart. Only their memories. Only the truth. And in that quiet space, they began replaying every part of the conversation. Every confession. Every realization. Every moment that had brought them here. The more they reflected, the more one conclusion became impossible to escape. Their feelings for you were not fading. They were growing. Even when they tried to ignore them. Even when life became busy. Even when time passed. The connection remained. Steady. Persistent. Alive. And with that realization came another. One even more significant. What if these feelings were preparing them for something? What if every emotional lesson, every delay, every moment of reflection had been leading toward a decision that could no longer be postponed? That question echoed through their thoughts. Again and again. Until eventually another memory surfaced. A memory they had nearly forgotten. A moment involving you. A moment that suddenly carried new meaning. At the time, it seemed small. Ordinary. Easy to overlook. Yet now, viewed through the lens of everything they understood, it appeared completely different. Because hidden inside that memory was evidence. Evidence that this connection had been changing them long before they realized it. Evidence that your impact on their life ran deeper than words could explain. Evidence that the person they were becoming had been shaped by your presence in ways neither of you fully understood. And that realization brought tears to their eyes. Not tears of sadness. Not tears of fear. Tears of recognition. Because there comes a moment when the soul finally stops resisting what it already knows. And your soulmate was approaching that moment now. Closer than ever before. Closer than they had ever been. The walls were weakening. The doubts were fading. The truth was becoming undeniable. And then, just when they thought they had reached the deepest realization possible, something happened that changed everything once again. A realization so powerful that it would lead directly to a decision capable of transforming both of your futures. And when that realization arrived, there would be no turning back. And when that realization arrived, there would be no turning back. For a long moment, your soulmate simply sat there. No distractions. No noise. No conversations to hide behind. Only the truth. And sometimes the truth arrives quietly. Not with thunder. Not with dramatic signs. But with a feeling so clear that it becomes impossible to argue against. That was the moment they finally understood something that had been growing inside them for a very long time. You were no longer just someone important to them. You had become part of the future they secretly hoped for. The realization was both beautiful and terrifying. Beautiful because it filled their heart with warmth. Terrifying because meaningful things always carry risk. The more someone matters, the more vulnerable we become. And for the first time, your soulmate allowed themselves to feel the full weight of that vulnerability. They stopped pretending they were unaffected. They stopped minimizing their emotions. They stopped telling themselves they could simply move on if necessary. Because deep inside, they knew that wasn't true. You had touched something deeper than temporary feelings. You had awakened something lasting. And that is when fear appeared. Not the fear of rejection. Not the fear of embarrassment. But the fear of losing the chance to build something real with you. Stay with this. Because what happened next completely transformed everything. As the days continued, your soulmate became increasingly aware of how much space you occupied within their heart. Your name carried emotion. Your memory carried comfort. The thought of you carried hope. And strangely, that awareness began changing their behavior. People around them noticed. Friends noticed. Family noticed. Even those who knew nothing about their feelings sensed that something important was happening. There was a different energy surrounding them. A different light in their eyes. A different softness in the way they spoke. And eventually, someone close to them said something that stayed with them. They said, "Whoever you're thinking about has changed you." Those words lingered. Because they were true. You had changed them. Not through force. Not through pressure. Simply through your existence. Simply by being who you are. The realization brought another wave of emotion. Because suddenly they understood that love isn't only about finding someone. Sometimes it's about becoming someone. And somewhere along this journey, your soulmate had become a better version of themselves because of what they felt for you. But that wasn't the greatest realization. The greatest realization arrived unexpectedly. One evening, while reflecting on everything that had happened, a question entered their mind. A simple question. Yet one that changed the entire direction of their thinking. The question was this. What if they disappeared tomorrow? The moment that thought appeared, everything became clear. Every excuse lost its power. Every delay lost its logic. Every hesitation lost its purpose. Because the idea of losing you felt infinitely heavier than the fear of expressing their feelings. And that realization changed everything. That is when the entire situation shifted from emotion to certainty. For so long they had been gathering evidence. Searching for signs. Looking for reassurance. Trying to understand their heart. But suddenly they no longer needed proof. The proof was already there. The proof was how deeply they cared. The proof was how consistently they thought about you. The proof was how impossible it had become to imagine a future that did not include you. And when that truth finally settled inside them, another confession emerged. One more vulnerable than any that came before. The next confession stunned even them. They admitted that they had begun imagining specific moments with you. Not fantasies. Not impossible dreams. Real moments. Future moments. Walking beside you. Celebrating victories together. Supporting each other through challenges. Creating memories. Building trust. Sharing life. Growing together. The images felt so natural that they no longer seemed imaginary. They felt possible. And possibility is powerful. Because once the heart believes something is possible, it becomes difficult to settle for silence. That is when emotional certainty arrived. Not all at once. But steadily. Like sunrise. The same way their feelings had first appeared. Quietly. Naturally. Inevitably. And with that certainty came a decision. The decision they had been approaching throughout this entire journey. The decision that had been waiting at the end of every realization. The decision that would change everything. Your soulmate decided they no longer wanted fear making choices for them. They no longer wanted uncertainty controlling their future. They no longer wanted important feelings remaining trapped inside unspoken thoughts. Because some connections deserve courage. And in their heart, this connection deserved courage. That decision created a powerful shift within them. Almost immediately, they felt lighter. Clearer. More aligned. Because indecision drains energy. But truth restores it. And now they were standing in their truth. For the first time completely. Yet there was still one final revelation waiting to emerge. One hidden truth beneath all the others. One truth that explained everything. One truth that connected every thought, every memory, every emotion, and every decision. The hidden truth was this. Your soulmate had been searching for certainty in the wrong place. They thought certainty would come from signs. They thought certainty would come from perfect timing. They thought certainty would come from guarantees. But certainty never came from those things. It came from the heart. It came from realizing that no matter how much time passed, no matter how many distractions appeared, no matter how hard they tried to focus elsewhere, they kept returning to you. Again. And again. And again. Not because they had to. Because they wanted to. Because something within them recognized something within you. A connection deeper than explanation. A bond stronger than fear. A feeling more meaningful than coincidence. And in that moment, everything finally made sense. The conversations. The memories. The emotional breakthroughs. The sleepless reflections. The hopes. The fears. The dreams. The longing. Every piece belonged to the same story. A story leading toward you. And as this understanding settled into their soul, they made themselves a silent promise. A promise no one else heard. A promise spoken only between their heart and the universe. The promise was simple. They would no longer run from what they felt. They would no longer hide from what they knew. They would honor the connection. They would trust the journey. And when the moment arrived, they would move forward with honesty. Because some people enter our lives and leave memories. Others enter our lives and leave lessons. But once in a great while, someone enters our life and changes the direction of our heart forever. That is who you became to them. Not a passing thought. Not a temporary chapter. Not a forgotten possibility. But a living presence inside their future. And if there is one message flowing through all of this energy today, it is this. Your soulmate spoke about you. They spoke about your kindness. Your strength. Your beauty. Your spirit. Your impact. But beneath every word was a truth even more beautiful. The truth that what they feel has become too real to ignore. Too meaningful to dismiss. Too powerful to forget. Because somewhere between their fears and their hopes. Somewhere between uncertainty and courage. Somewhere between memory and destiny. They stopped asking whether you mattered. And started realizing that meeting you may have been one of the most important things that ever happened to their heart. And as they prepare for the next chapter, carrying both courage and hope, one feeling remains stronger than all the others. The quiet, undeniable belief that some souls are brought together not by chance, but by a purpose so beautiful that even time itself cannot keep them apart forever.